"They cannot die, not here, not now," old Marek whispered, his eyes fixed on the two small figures trembling beneath rags, a burning fever consuming his granddaughters, Elara and Lyra. The damp, fetid air of the abandoned village ruins seemed to suck the life from their every breath, while dry coughs tore at their fragile lungs. With each whimper from the little girls, a drop of hope died in Marek's torn heart. But in the oppressive silence of that icy night, a sound erupted from the depths, a constant, mysterious rhythm, the beats of the abyss he had been hearing for days. Was it a desperate call, or perhaps a warning? With despair gnawing at his soul and the image of his granddaughters fading, Marek clutched his torch, determined to unravel the secret of that sound, knowing that what he was about to discover in the bowels of those ruins could be the last chance at life for his beloved granddaughters, or the end of everything. Marek tightened his grip on the torch in his trembling hand, the flame's warmth a fragile contrast to the cold that chilled his soul. A last glance at his granddaughters, whose pale faces were barely visible in the gloom, a painful squeeze in his chest, and he turned away. Each step was a silent prayer, an echo of the love that propelled him. The rhythmic beats, once distant, now seemed to vibrate beneath his feet, a drumming that called him to the depths. He followed the sound, fumbling along the damp walls of the ruins, until he found a hidden crevice behind a mossy stone, almost invisible. It was narrow, barely allowing his body to pass, but the promise of healing for Elara and Lyra was a more powerful engine than any obstacle. With a heavy sigh, Marek squeezed through the opening, his torch held aloft. The air was dense, laden with the smell of wet earth and centuries of oblivion, almost suffocating. The passage spiraled downwards, the uneven and slippery steps demanding his attention, each stride a risk. The almost absolute darkness swallowed the torch's faint light, casting dancing shadows that whispered ancient legends. Marek's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and stubborn hope. He thought of his wife, how she would encourage him with a smile, her unwavering faith a beacon in the darkness. A tear traced his cheek, but he wiped it away quickly. There was no time for mourning, only for action. With each turn, the sound of the beats intensified, transforming into a soft, constant murmur, like running water. Marek, exhausted, struggled to understand. His mind, despite the fatigue, insisted on seeking answers. Was it an underground river? An illusion? He continued his descent, muscles aching, breath ragged. The images of Elara and Lyra, feverish, were the fuel that kept him from giving up. He remembered their laughter, the sparkle in their eyes before the illness, and that vision propelled him onward. Suddenly the passage widened, and the darkness receded. A faint, greenish glow filtered from somewhere, almost a silent invitation. And the murmur of water became clear and inviting. Marek stumbled, his torch trembling. His eyes, accustomed to the gloom, discerned shapes. It was no empty cave, no bottomless pit. Before him stretched a spectacle that defied logic and his understanding. A spring of crystal-clear waters gushed from an ancient rock, its waters shimmering with an almost magical glow, illuminated by a light that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. The water flowed into a small underground lake, so clear that the bottom of polished stones was visible. And around the spring, amidst the humidity and warmth emanating from the spot, a secret garden flourished. Herbs with vibrant leaves and flowers of never-before-seen colors stretched out in natural beds, exuding a sweet, earthy fragrance. The old man fell to his knees, not from exhaustion, but from a relief so profound it stole his breath. It was not a treasure of gold, but something far more precious: life. His hands trembled as he touched the water, feeling warm, healing energy radiate from it. The beats of the abyss were not a warning, but a call to hope. Warm tears streamed down Marek's wrinkled face, mixing with dirt and sweat, but he didn't feel them. only gratitude, a surging river that flooded his chest, drowning the despair that had consumed him for days. He knelt on the damp earth, hands outstretched towards the spring, feeling the water's warm, pulsating energy. It was more than water. It was the whispered promise of life, a miracle unfolding before his weary eyes. With a reverent gesture, he dipped his fingers into the crystalline current, feeling a gentle, almost electric tingling that seemed to invigorate his very soul. His eyes swept over the hidden garden, each leaf, each flower, seeming to glow with its own light. The herbs, a green so vibrant it seemed unreal, exuded aromas he had never smelled before, earthy, sweet, slightly pungent, a symphony of scents that promised healing. He remembered his dear wife, who had always known the secrets of plants, the forest's medicines. She would have loved this place, would have recognized the ancient wisdom that resided there. A melancholic yet hopeful smile curved his lips. She had taught him to observe, to feel, to trust nature. And now, that lesson manifested so grandly. But there was no time for contemplation. Ilara and Lyra, the image of their pale faces and feverish bodies, pulled him back to the urgency of the moment. He needed to act, and fast. Marek reached into his leather pouch, which he had carried since leaving the village, pulling out a small clay flask and a piece of clean cloth. Carefully, he filled the flask with water from the spring, watching how it shimmered, almost alive within the container. Then, with the delicacy of an experienced gardener, he began to gather the herbs. He selected those with wider leaves and softer petals, guided by an intuition that seemed to come from the place itself, a knowledge awakening within him. Every movement was precise, driven by unwavering love. The cloth quickly filled with aromatic herbs, and Marek tied them with a firm knot. He looked one last time at the spring and the garden, a silent promise that he would return. The torch, almost spent, cast long dancing shadows as he turned towards the narrow passage. The ascent would be arduous, but the exhaustion that had crushed him before was now replaced by renewed strength, an energy that seemed to emanate from the very water he carried. Each uneven step, each slippery stone was a challenge he faced with determination. The flask and the bundle of herbs were more precious than any treasure, their weight a constant reminder of the life waiting above. With each turn of the spiral, the faint light from the ruins seemed like a beacon, an invitation to the surface. When he finally emerged from the crevice, the cold night air hit him, but he barely felt it. His eyes immediately sought out the small, huddled figures, Ilara and Lyra. Their hearts beat weakly, their breathing wheezing. Marek approached, his heart heavy, but now with a flame of hope warming his chest. With trembling but steady hands, he opened the flask. "My dears, Grandpa has brought the cure," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion as the first drops of the miraculous water touched Ilara's parched lips. Ilara, who until then seemed plunged into a deep, restless sleep, trembled slightly. Her lips, cracked and dry, moved almost imperceptibly, and a faint whimper escaped her throat. Marek watched every slightest movement with his heart in his hands, his eyes fixed on his granddaughter, searching for any sign, no matter how tiny. He waited, breath held, the flask still tilted. A minute felt like an eternity. Then, to his indescribable relief, little Ilara swallowed. A simple act, but one that for Marek represented a monumental victory. With redoubled care, he offered a few more drops, and this time Ilara drank a little more easily, a slight tremor running through her body. Next, Marek turned to Lyra, whose condition seemed even more severe. The girl's face was pale and sweaty, her hair matted to her forehead. With the same tenderness and precision, he brought the flask to Lyra's lips. At first, she resisted, her mouth clamped shut. But with patience and gentle whispers, Marek managed to get her to drink the water too. 1, 2, 3 drops, each a thread of hope weaving itself into the darkness of illness. He felt a gentle warmth emanate from their small bodies, an almost imperceptible change, but one that fed the flame of his faith. With the flask half emptied, Marek untied the herb bundle. The sweet, earthy scent filled the air, a balm for the heavy atmosphere of the ruins. He took some of the softest leaves, crushed them between his fingers, releasing their essential oils, and gently applied them to Ilara's forehead and chest like an improvised poultice. His wrinkled, calloused fingers were surprisingly delicate, moving with the precision of one performing a sacred ritual. Ilara sighed, a sound not of pain, but of subtle relief. Marek repeated the process with Lyra, massaging the girl's temples with the herbs, feeling the feverish skin beneath his touches. Night advanced, and old Marek sat between his two granddaughters, watching them with tireless vigilance. He dared not close his eyes, fearing to miss any sign of improvement or, God forbid, of worsening. The fever seemed to resist, but the intensity of the heat in their bodies lessened slightly, a silent promise that the cure was working. Ilara, who had been coughing incessantly, now had slightly more regular breathing, though still weak. Lyra, who seemed more prostrate, wiggled her fingers, an almost imperceptible movement, but one that made Marek's heart leap. The hours dragged on, heavy and slow. Fear still clung to his chest, a persistent shadow, but hope, once a small point of light, now expanded, warming him from within. He changed the herb compresses, moistened the girl's lips with a few more drops of the precious water, always with the same dedication and love. At dawn, as the first rays of sun peeked through the cracks in the ruins, painting the earthen floor with golden hues, Marek noticed a more significant change. Ilara opened her eyes, not completely, but a glimpse of her blue irises, now less cloudy, appeared. She blinked slowly, as if waking from a very deep sleep. A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. Marek let out a sob, tears welling from his tired eyes, streaming freely down his face. They were not tears of sadness, but of pure, overwhelming joy, confirmation that the miracle had happened. He leaned in and kissed his granddaughter's damp forehead, feeling the fever's heat noticeably recede. Shortly after, Lyra also showed signs of improvement. Her breathing became softer, and a faint blush returned to her pale cheeks. She turned onto her side, nestling into the rags, and a small sound of comfort escaped her. Marek felt an immense weight lifted from his shoulders, as if a mountain had been raised. Gratitude filled every fiber of his being, a wave of emotion so strong it left him breathless. He looked at his granddaughters, now sleeping a more peaceful sleep, and at the almost empty flask. The spring and the garden were not just a source of healing, they were a gift, a second chance. Marek understood that his journey didn't end there. He would need to return to the depths, replenish his supplies, and perhaps, just perhaps, the abandoned village could become more than a temporary refuge. It could be a sanctuary, a place where life would be reborn, not just for his granddaughters, but for all who would one day dare to believe in miracles. With a final glance at Ilara and Lyra, whose lives now pulsed with a new and fragile hope, Marek felt renewed strength, a promise of a new beginning. Marek watched the sun rise completely, bathing the ruins in golden light. Ilara and Lyra slept deeply, their faces relaxed, their breathing soft and regular. A healthy flush returned to their cheeks. The fever's sweat had vanished. He touched Ilara's forehead again. The excessive heat was gone, replaced by a normal temperature. A genuine smile, long absent, bloomed on his lips. That was the true miracle, hope pulsating in his heart. He rose carefully, his body aching, but joy was a powerful analgesic. He needed more water and herbs. The spring called to him, no longer with enigmatic beats, but with a promise of sustenance. Before leaving, Marek took a clean cloth, moistened it with the little water left in the flask, and wiped his granddaughters' faces, removing the marks of illness. His gestures were full of a tenderness only a grandfather can possess. With the torch almost extinguished and the flask empty, Marek descended into the crevice again. This time there was no dread, but reverence. Each uneven step was a reminder of the journey from despair transformed into redemption. The damp, fragrant air of the hidden garden welcomed him. The greenish light of the spring seemed even brighter, the herbs more vibrant. He filled the flask with the crystalline water, feeling its revitalizing energy. He gathered more herbs, this time to nourish health. As he knelt there by the spring, Marek felt a deep connection to the place. It wasn't just a hiding spot, but a pulsating heart of life. He thought of his wife, how she would have marveled at the beauty and power of that garden. A solitary tear traced his cheek, but it was of peace, not pain. He knew she would be proud that his love for his granddaughters had guided him to this sanctuary. Upon returning to the surface, the sun was already high. Ilara and Lyra were still asleep, but now in a restorative slumber. Marek prepared an infusion with fresh herbs and spring water, an aromatic tea he offered to the girls when they finally awoke. Ilara opened her eyes first, a flicker of recognition. "Grandpa?" she whispered, her voice weak. Marek smiled, his heart overflowing. "Yes, my dear. Grandpa is here." Lyra awoke shortly after, her large, curious eyes fixing on her grandfather. Both drank the tea, feeling its comforting warmth. Though still weak, the improvement was remarkable. They sat up, leaning against the rags, and looked at Marek with silent gratitude. It was a new day, a new chance. Marek knew that physical healing was just the beginning. He needed to rebuild their lives. The abandoned village, once a gloomy refuge, began to take on new meaning in Marek's mind. It wouldn't just be a place to survive, but a home, a sanctuary. He imagined the ruins being cleared, shelters built, the secret garden as the source of life. The idea of altruism began to germinate. If that water and herbs healed his granddaughters, they could heal others. The vision of a new beginning, not just for his small family, but for anyone seeking hope, ignited a new flame in his spirit. The flame that had ignited in Marek's spirit was not an impetuous fire, but a constant ember, warming him with silent determination. The abandoned village, once a labyrinth of shadows and despair, now presented itself as a blank canvas, a place where life could be redrawn. With the sunrise, he rose, feeling his aged body protest, but his mind was clear, driven by a greater purpose. Ilara and Lyra were still asleep, their faces serene, the sleep of healing, and Marek watched them for a long moment, his heart swollen with love and gratitude. His first task was to make the shelter more habitable. The small crevice in the wall, where they had spent the last few nights, was damp and cold. Marek began to move loose stones and rubble, clearing a slightly larger and more protected space. His muscles, long accustomed to the arduous work of farming, responded with a groan, but he persisted. Every stone removed, every piece of rotten wood cleared away, was a step towards the future he envisioned. He dreamed of a safer roof, a constant fire, a place where his granddaughters could laugh and play without the shadow of illness. As he worked, Ilara awoke, her blue eyes blinking slowly. She sat up, leaning against the wall, and looked at her grandfather with childlike curiosity. "Grandpa, what are you doing?" Her voice was weak, but clear. Marek stopped, a wide smile spreading across his wrinkled face. "I'm building a home for us, my flower, a safe and warm place." He approached, offering her some of the herbal tea he had prepared. Ilara drank slowly, feeling the warm energy spread through her body. Shortly after, Lyra also awoke, her large dark eyes watching her grandfather and sister. Marek gave them more tea and some of the crushed herbs to chew, explaining that they would help strengthen their hearts. The girl's improvement was a balm to Marek's soul. They were still weak, but the fever had completely subsided. Lyra, with a small smile, reached out to touch her grandfather's white beard, a gesture of affection that filled him with indescribable joy. "You saved us, Grandpa," Ilara whispered, and Marek felt a lump in his throat. "It was the spring, my dears, and the love we have for each other." He embraced them tenderly, feeling the fragility of their small bodies, but also life pulsating strongly again. Marek knew the journey was just beginning. The idea of transforming the ruins into a healing sanctuary was no small feat. It would require more than just physical strength. It would demand unwavering faith and the ability to inspire others. But who? The village was abandoned, forgotten. He felt alone, the vastness of the task weighing on his shoulders. Where would he find help? How would he make people believe in something as magical as a healing spring and a secret garden? Doubt, an old enemy, tried to creep into his heart, but he repelled it with the image of his healed granddaughters. He needed a plan, a strategy. First, he would ensure Ilara and Lyra's safety and comfort. Then, he would think about how the outside world could be reached, how news of the cure could spread. The spring was a treasure, and he felt the responsibility to protect it and share its gifts. With the flask and herb pouch replenished, Marek looked at the setting sun, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. The ruins, bathed in that soft light, seemed less threatening, more welcoming. He sat beside his granddaughters, who were now dozing peacefully, and began to dream, not just of rebuilding a home, but of restoring hope for many. The path would be long, but the promise of a new beginning, of a place of healing and altruism, was a bright beacon in his soul. Marek, with the sun already setting, felt the ember of hope burn stronger in his chest. His granddaughters slept, life gently pulsating within them, a silent testament to the miracle they had lived. He knew that the first step towards the future he envisioned was to strengthen the shelter. With morning, he dedicated himself to this, his aged muscles, though invigorated by joy, moving with renewed purpose. He gathered larger stones to close the wider gaps in the crumbling walls, using dry branches and dense leaves to create a more effective barrier against the cold wind that stubbornly tried to seep in. The girls, though still weak, watched him with eyes now curious and full of life, a blessed contrast to the feverish pallor of days past. Lyra, the youngest, with her newfound energy, tried to help, picking up small twigs and pebbles, and Marek encouraged her with a wide smile, his heart overflowing. "We are building our new home, my little warriors," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. With each passing day, Ilara and Lyra's strength returned more visibly. Marek took them outside, into the soft morning sunlight so their bodies could absorb the warmth and vital energy. He taught them about the herbs he had brought from the secret garden, showing how some could be used to strengthen the body, others to calm the mind and alleviate small pains. Ilara, with her keen intelligence and thirst for knowledge, absorbed every word, asking questions about the properties of each leaf, her eyes shining with new interest. Lyra, more practical and sensory, enjoyed smelling the herbs, giggling softly when the pungent aroma made her nose tickle. Marek descended to the spring twice a day, refilling the flask and gathering new herbs, always with the feeling that the place called to him, not just to meet his needs, but for a deeper, almost spiritual connection. He began to clear the path leading to the crevice, removing loose stones and slippery moss, as if preparing the sanctuary for future visitors. The idea of sharing the healing with others, of transforming the ruins into a beacon of hope for the afflicted, grew and solidified in his heart. But how? The nearest village was days away, and he couldn't leave his granddaughters alone and still recovering. It was then, on a sunny afternoon, while Marek was teaching Ilara to identify a silver-leafed herb growing near an ancient stone, that a distant sound broke the almost sacred silence of the ruins. A cry, faint but unmistakable, laden with despair. Marek stopped, his heart leaping in his chest, a shiver running down his spine. He looked at Ilara, who had also heard and now stared at him with wide eyes. "Grandpa, what is that?" Marek signaled for them to be quiet, and with the agility that worry gave him, hid behind a crumbling wall, cautiously peeking through a crack. Along the dusty trail that snaked towards the ruins, two stumbling figures appeared. They were a young woman with a pale face and sunken eyes, denoting weariness and suffering, and a small boy, clinging to her skirt, crying softly. A heartbreaking sound. Both seemed exhausted, covered in dust and mud from their journey, and to Marek's horror, the woman coughed with alarming frequency, the hoarse, heavy sound echoing in the air. The fever. The same mysterious and deadly fever that had almost claimed his beloved granddaughters. Marek's heart tightened in a mix of compassion and apprehension. They were strangers, but the sight of their suffering was a mirror of the pain and despair he himself had felt just days ago. The woman and the boy approached slowly, their steps dragging and hesitant, each movement a struggle. The woman seemed to be at the limit of her strength, her eyes sweeping the ruins with silent desperation, searching for any sign of shelter, of help, of hope. Marek felt the dilemma weigh on him, a moral burden. He had the cure, yes, but it was for his granddaughters, for his small family. Could he risk their safety and the limited resources he possessed to help strangers? The voice of his beloved wife, Clara, echoed in his mind, soft but firm. True strength is not in accumulating, Marek, but in reaching out, in sharing what you have, especially when life is at stake. He took a deep breath, the decision made, a warmth spreading through his chest. There was no doubt. The healing sanctuary could not begin only in his dreams or in his mind. It needed to begin there, at that moment, with those whom life or perhaps destiny had brought to his doorstep, an unexpected test of his newfound hope and purpose. Marek emerged from behind the crumbling wall, his steps slow and deliberate so as not to startle the newcomers. The woman, seeing him, let out a small cry of surprise and instinctively recoiled, pulling the boy closer to her. Her eyes, previously fixed on the ground, now stared at him with a mixture of fear and distrust, as if expecting an attack. The boy, frightened, hid his face in his mother's skirt, his crying muffled. "Don't be afraid, please," Marek said, his voice hoarse but gentle, raising his empty hands in a gesture of peace. "I mean you no harm. I saw that you are sick and exhausted." He approached a little closer, stopping at a respectful distance. The woman, who seemed to be his daughter's age, clung to her son with desperate strength, but her knees trembled visibly. "Who are you? What are you doing in this forgotten place?" she asked, her voice weak and trembling from the cough that afflicted her. The boy, peeking from behind her skirt, had red, swollen eyes and pale, feverish skin. Marek felt a pang in his heart, seeing in them the same fragility that had overcome Ilara and Lyra. "My name is Marek, and this place is now a refuge. My granddaughters were also afflicted by the same fever that troubles you. But I found a cure," he explained, pointing to the flask at his waist and the herb pouch. The woman's eyes widened slightly, a spark of something that looked like hope, or perhaps just desperation, igniting in her gaze. Ilara and Lyra, curious, had approached silently, peeking from behind a rock. Ilara, with her observant nature, felt the woman and boy's distress. Lyra, more impulsive, made a small sound of compassion. Marek looked at them, and then at the strangers, a gentle smile on his face. "They are the proof. They were as sick as you, but the water and herbs brought them back." The woman hesitated, her eyes sweeping the ruins, then Marek's granddaughters, who waved shyly. The cough overcame her again, a violent fit that made her double over, hand on her chest. The boy, whom Marek now realized was a little younger than Lyra, began to cry harder, frightened by his mother. "Please," Marek insisted, his voice laden with sincerity, "let me help you. I don't have much, but what I have, I will share." He knelt slowly, opening the flask and the herb pouch. The sweet, earthy aroma of the herbs wafted through the air, a silent invitation. The woman, exhausted and without strength to resist, finally yielded. Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded her head, a solitary tear tracing her dirty face. "My name is Lena," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible, "and this is my son, Kyle." Marek offered the water first to Kyle, who after a moment of hesitation drank eagerly, his small hands trembling as he held the flask. Lena watched with the intensity of one witnessing a miracle. Next, Marek helped her drink, and she felt the water's coolness descend her inflamed throat, an immediate relief. He crushed some herbs and applied them to Kyle's forehead, then to Lena's chest, with the same delicacy he had used with his granddaughters. The sun set, painting the sky with fiery hues as Marek tended to the newcomers. Ilara and Lyra, now more at ease, sat nearby, observing. Ilara even offered a piece of dry bread that Marek had saved. Kyle, though still weak, took the bread with gratitude. Marek felt a profound sense of peace. Fear and doubt had dissipated, replaced by an unwavering certainty. There, in the forgotten ruins, the promise of a healing sanctuary began to materialize, an act of love and altruism that transcended his own family. Clara's voice, his beloved wife, seemed to whisper on the wind, confirming that he was on the right path. Life, even in the most desolate places, always found a way to flourish. Night fell softly over the ruins, and Marek continued to care for Lena and Kale with the same dedication he had shown his granddaughters. The coolness of the spring water and the aroma of the herbs seemed to envelop the newcomers in a mantle of relief. Kale, exhausted, fell asleep in Lena's arms, his breathing still heavy, but a little more regular. Lena, in turn, felt the fever subside, her body less aching. She watched Marek with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. The elderly man, with his white beard and calloused hands, was the personification of kindness in a world that had only shown her cruelty. Ilara and Lyra, now stronger, sat nearby, observing the scene with curiosity and childlike empathy. Ilara, the elder, touched Lyra's hand, a silent gesture of understanding. Marek prepared an improvised bed for Lena and Kyle, using the few blankets and rags he possessed, ensuring they were protected from the night's cold. He sat beside them, watching over the sleep of all four, his heart filled with a new responsibility. The promise of a sanctuary began to take shape, no longer as a distant dream, but as a tangible reality. At dawn, the first rays of sun brought with them a notable improvement. Kyle awoke first, his brown eyes less cloudy, and looked at Marek with a small smile. Lena also awoke, feeling a lightness in her body she hadn't experienced in weeks. The cough, though still present, was less violent. I don't know how to thank you," Lena whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Marek merely smiled, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Your recovery, my daughter, and Kale's, is gratitude enough." He offered them more herbal tea and fresh spring water. Ilara and Lyra approached, and Ilara, with her natural sweetness, offered Kale a small wooden toy Marek had carved for her. Kale, shy at first, took the toy, and soon the three were playing softly, faint laughter echoing through the ruins. That sound, the sound of childlike joy, was music to Marek's ears. Lena watched the scene, tears streaming down her face. She had lost so much, and now, in this forgotten place, she found not only healing, but a community, an unexpected family. "Where does this water come from, Marek, these herbs? They are a miracle," she asked, her voice full of admiration. Marek hesitated for a moment. The spring was a precious secret, a gift he felt responsible for protecting, but Lena and Kyle were part of that miracle now. "It is a gift, Lena, a gift given to us to share," he replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sun was rising, promising a new and hopeful day. He explained about the enigmatic beats, the secret passage, and the discovery of the hidden garden. Lena listened with wide eyes, the story seeming more like a fairy tale than reality. Marek's faith was contagious. He knew that the path to transforming the ruins into a true sanctuary would be arduous. Distrust and fear of the outside world were real obstacles. But looking at the children playing and the renewed hope in Lena's eyes, Marek felt an unwavering strength. The sanctuary would not just be a place of healing, but of rebirth, a beacon of altruism and human connection in dark times. He needed help, more hands and hearts willing to believe. The journey was just beginning, but now he was no longer alone. Marek's faith was contagious, and his explanation of the spring and the hidden garden had planted a seed of hope in Lena's heart. Her eyes, once filled with despair, now shone with a new light, reflecting the old man's unwavering belief. She looked at Kale, who was giggling softly as Ilara showed him how to make a small boat from tree bark, and a genuine smile, the first in a long time, curved her lips. It's unbelievable, Marek," she whispered, her voice still weak but filled with admiration. "A place like this, hidden from the world," Marek nodded, his blue eyes fixed on her with a gentleness that calmed her. "Life has its own secrets, Lena, and sometimes the greatest gifts are in the most unexpected places." He stood up, extending a hand to help her. "We need strength, hands, to care for this place, to share its gifts." Lena took his hand, feeling the roughness of his skin, but also the firmness of purpose. She stood, feeling her body still weak, but her mind clear and filled with renewed energy. I want to help, Marek. I have nothing to offer but my strength, but it is yours." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude and a deep desire to repay the kindness she had received. In the days that followed, Lena became an essential part of the small family. With the help of the spring water and herbs, her recovery was swift. She, who could barely move before, now helped Marek clear the ruins, gather firewood, and prepare infusions. Kyle, completely healed, joined Ilara and Lyra in their games, and the sound of their childlike laughter filled the air, transforming the melancholic silence of the village into a melody of life. Marek watched them, his heart overflowing. The sight of Lena, her face now flushed and her eyes bright with hope, was a living testament to the miracle. The task of transforming the ruins into a sanctuary, however, was monumental. They had strengthened the shelter, but the rest of the village was a tangle of crumbling stones and wild vegetation. "We need more people," Marek said one evening as they sat around a small fire, its cozy warmth contrasting with the cold stone. "People who believe, who are willing to work and to share." Lena, who was mending a patch on one of Kyle's clothes, looked up. "But how will we find them, Marek? Who would come to this forgotten place? And who would believe in a magical spring?" Her voice held a tone of concern, an echo of the world's distrust, she knew. Marek knew Lena was right. Fear and superstition were great barriers. The people from their village and others nearby were skeptical and distrustful, accustomed to fending for themselves. "We will have to show them, Lena, with our actions, with the healing we can offer." He paused, looking at the dancing flames. "But we cannot leave the girls alone, and I am no longer a young man." Lena thought for a moment, her fingers pausing from sewing. "I can go, Marek. I can return to our village. I can tell them what happened, show them Kale, who is healed." Marek looked at her, surprise and concern mixed on his face. It's dangerous, Lena. People are sick, desperate. They might not believe, or worse, they might try to take what we have. I know the risk, she replied, her voice firm, her eyes filled with new determination. But I owe it to you, to Kyle, to all who still suffer. If one life is saved, it will have been worth it. Ilara, who had been listening in silence, approached Lena, holding her hand. We'll miss you, Lena, she whispered. Lyra and Kyle, sensing the tension, stopped playing and looked at their mother and grandfather. Marek pondered, the weight of the decision on his shoulders. The idea of sending Lena back into the outside world, full of dangers and uncertainties, distressed him, but the vision of a healing sanctuary, of a beacon of hope, depended on it. He looked at Lena, at the courage shining in her eyes, and at the children to whom he owed everything. Very well, Lena, he said, his voice soft but resolute. But you will not go alone. I will give you the flask with the spring water and a pouch of the most powerful herbs, and you must promise to be cautious, not to risk your life. Lena nodded, a wave of relief and gratitude washing over her. I promise. Marek, I will return, and I will bring hope. The next morning, under the watchful eyes of Marek and the children, Lena departed, Kyle clinging to her hand, a small water flask and an herb pouch hanging from her shoulder. Silence once again settled over the ruins, but now it was a silence charged with expectation, with a promise that they hoped would soon materialize. Marek watched Lena's figure diminish on the horizon, a mix of pride and apprehension in his heart. The journey to the healing sanctuary had just taken its first step outside the ruins. Marek watched Lena's figure diminish on the horizon, a mix of pride and apprehension in his heart. The journey to the healing sanctuary had just taken its first step outside the ruins. The sun slowly rose, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, but the morning's beauty couldn't entirely dispel the cloud of worry that hung over him. Ilara and Lyra, hand in hand, stood beside him, their eyes fixed on the spot where Lena and Kale had disappeared. Will she come back, Grandpa? Lyra asked, her voice small and uncertain. Marek knelt, embracing them both tenderly. Yes, my little ones. Lena is strong and brave. She will bring hope to more people. But deep down, he knew Lena's task was monumental. Fear and distrust were deeply rooted in people's hearts. Meanwhile, Lena and Kyle followed the dusty trail. Kyle, with his renewed childlike energy, skipped ahead, but Lena held his hand, her eyes cautiously sweeping the landscape. With each step, the determination in her chest clashed with the vivid memory of the suffering she had left behind. The village was infested with illness, and the memory of incessant coughing and pale faces still haunted her. She felt the weight of the flask and the herb pouch, not just as objects, but as the very hope she carried. The path was long, and with each mile the landscape became more familiar, and with it the anxiety of how she would be received. She mentally rehearsed her words, imagining the reactions, the skepticism in her neighbor's eyes. In the days that followed in the ruins, Marek diligently worked to strengthen the shelter and expand the herb garden, as if the labor could appease his anxiety. Ilara and Lyra helped him, gathering branches, carrying smaller stones, their laughter filling the void left by Lena and Kale. Grandpa, do you think Kale's mom will succeed? Ilara asked one afternoon as she helped arrange the dried herbs. Marek paused, stroking his white beard. She will try with all her heart, Ilara, and faith is a powerful force. He missed Lena's presence, her quiet strength and her nimble hands. The loneliness, which he thought he had overcome, threatened to return in subtle waves. Lena and Kale finally spotted the first houses of the village. A faint smoke rose from some chimneys, but the silence was heavy, broken only by the sporadic cry of a child or a hoarse cough. There was no usual bustle, no joyful voices of children playing. The scene was desolate. Lena felt a tightening in her chest. But the sight of Cale, running ahead with a smile, was her shield against despair. She knew she needed to be cautious. People were scared, distrustful. As she approached a more secluded house, Lena saw a woman sitting by the door, her face thin and her eyes fixed on the ground, cradling a weakly crying baby. It was Marta, a longtime neighbor. Lena took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "Marta," she called, her voice soft. The woman lifted her head, her eyes wide with surprise and then disbelief. "Lena, you're back, and Cale, but the fever." Her voice trailed off, and she coughed, covering her mouth with her hand. Cale, sensing the sadness, clung to his mother's skirt. Lena approached slowly, showing Cale, who was radiant and healthy. "We are cured, Marta. I found a place, a man. He has the cure." Marta looked at Kyle, then at Lena, a spark of hope mixed with deep skepticism in her cloudy eyes. "Cure? There's no cure for this plague, Lena. Many are already gone. My little one. He's sick too." She pointed to the baby, who was pale and feverish, with parched lips. Lena felt the urgency. "I can help, Marta. Please, let me try." She took out the flask and the herb pouch, their soft, earthy aroma spreading through the air, a strange contrast to the smell of illness that hung over the village. Distrust was palpable in Marta's eyes, but the despair she carried was even greater, heavier than any skepticism. Her eyes fixed on the flask, then on Kyle, who smiled at the baby. Marta's hesitation was visible in every line of her face. Far away, Marek at sunset watched the stars emerge in the sky. The fire crackled softly, and Ilara and Lyra were already asleep, nestled under the blankets. He felt the weight of responsibility, the vastness of the task he had embraced. The silence of the ruins was different now, no longer one of abandonment, but of patient waiting. He placed another branch on the fire, the flames dancing, reflecting the flame of hope he kept alive in his heart. Clara's voice whispered in his memory, "Faith moves mountains, my love, and kindness, hearts." He knew Lena was facing a world of pain and disbelief, but he had to believe that the seed of hope, once planted, would find its way to flourish. Marta's hesitation was visible in every line of her face, a silent battle between the despair that consumed her and the distrust life had taught her. Her eyes, clouded by fever and exhaustion, fixed on Cale, who, oblivious to the tension, extended a small hand towards the baby. The contrast between the boy's vitality and the newborn's fragility was stark. Lena, sensing the urgency, slowly knelt before Marta, her own eyes welling with compassion. "Please, Marta, let me try. There's nothing to lose, only to gain." Her voice was a whisper, but laden with unwavering conviction. Marta looked at the baby, who let out a faint whimper, his small body trembling. The image of Kyle, radiant and full of life, was a beacon in her darkness. With a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, she nodded, a solitary tear tracing her face. Do what you can, Lena. My little one. He's fading." With steady hands, Lena opened the flask, pouring a few drops of the crystalline water into a wooden spoon Marta offered her. The fresh, clean aroma of the spring seemed to purify the heavy air of illness. Delicately, she brought the spoon to the baby's parched lips. The little one instinctively swallowed the water. Lena then took some of the herbs from the pouch, crushed them between her fingers, and gently applied them to the baby's feverish forehead and chest, as she had seen Marek do. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Marta's gasping breath and Kyle's suppressed crying. Minutes dragged like hours. Marta watched Lena's every move, every expression on her face, with an almost painful intensity. Suddenly, the baby let out a deeper sigh, and his crying subsided to a murmur. The pale color of his skin seemed to gain a slightly pinker hue. Marta brought a trembling hand to her son's forehead. "The fever. It's going down," she whispered, her eyes wide with astonishment, a spark of hope igniting in her gaze. It's a miracle." The news, like a whisper on the wind, began to spread. Neighbors, drawn by Lena and Cale's presence or by the commotion at Marta's house, began to approach, peeking from behind doors and windows, their faces marked by illness and distrust. They saw Cale, a boy everyone knew to be sick, now running and playing. They saw Marta, tears in her eyes, holding her baby who, though still weak, seemed to breathe more easily. Lena stood up, her heart pounding, but her voice now firm and clear. "I found the cure. A man, Marek, in the ruins of the forgotten village. He has a spring of healing water and a garden of ancient herbs. He saved my granddaughters, he saved Cale, and now he saved Marta's son." She pointed to the baby, who now slept peacefully in his mother's arms. "He welcomed us, he healed us, and he wants to share this gift with all who need it." A murmur of voices began to rise among the neighbors. Skepticism, yes, but also a desperate hunger for hope. Some approached, their eyes fixed on the flask and the herb pouch Lena held. Others recoiled, the fear of the unknown and of magic stronger than the pain. Lena knew the battle was far from won, but the first seed of faith had been planted. Far away in the ruins, Marek felt a tightening in his chest, a premonition. He looked at the night sky, stars twinkling like distant promises. Ilara and Lyra slept, their faces serene. He knew Lena was facing the greatest challenge of all. Convincing hearts hardened by suffering. The fire's flame flickered, and Marek prayed with all his soul that the light of hope could somehow reach those who needed it most, dispelling the darkness of disbelief. The fate of the sanctuary and of so many lives now rested in Lena's courageous hands. Lena felt the weight of their gazes upon her, a mix of curiosity, fear, and a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer of hope. Marta, with her baby now asleep and breathing more regularly, was living proof. "I know it's hard to believe," Lena began, her voice echoing in the tense silence. "I wouldn't believe it myself, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, if Cale weren't here, healthy." She gestured to her son, who, feeling his mother's gaze, smiled shyly at the crowd. "Marek wants neither gold nor power. He only wants to help. He gave us a home, a purpose." A thin man, racked by a dry cough, stepped forward. "What if it's a trap, Lena? What if this cure is just a new plague?" His face was contorted with distrust. Lena met his gaze, her eyes firm. "It's not. I've been there. Kyle has been there. Marta's son is getting better. The water is pure. The herbs are from the earth. It's a gift." She explained again about the beets, the spring, the garden. With each word, the seed of faith seemed to grow in the hearts of the most desperate. Marta, holding the baby tighter, stood up. "She's telling the truth." Her voice, though weak, carried a conviction that silenced the murmurs. "My son was dying. Now he sleeps. I will go with Lena." Her declaration was a catalyst. Others, whose children or loved ones were on the brink of death, began to stir. An elderly woman with trembling hands asked, "Is there room for all of us?" Lena smiled, a smile that lit up her tired face. "There is hope for everyone." Far away, Marek felt the cold night air tighten his chest. The fire burned low, and the girls slept deeply. He stood up, walking to the edge of the ruins, looking into the darkness that stretched towards the village. A sense of urgency propelled him, a certainty that something was happening. He rubbed his calloused hands, imagining Lena confronting fear and disbelief. "May the light guide them," he whispered to the wind, his voice laden with a silent prayer. He knew that the true test of the sanctuary was not the healing itself, but the ability to inspire faith and unity. The next morning brought a small caravan. Lena led the group, Kyle by her side, now with his chest puffed out with pride. Behind them, Marta, with her baby rosier and more awake in her arms, and a few more families, their faces still pale, but with a new spark in their eyes. The journey was slow, punctuated by pauses for rest and for Lena to offer water and herbs to the weakest. With each step, hope solidified. When the ruins appeared on the horizon, a wave of murmurs swept through the group. It was a desolate place, but the smoke from Marek's fire was a beacon. Marek, Ilara, and Lyra were waiting, their hearts pounding. Seeing Lena, safe and sound, and the small entourage behind her, a wide, relieved smile spread across the old man's face. Ilara and Lyra ran to embrace Kyle and Lena, the joy of their reunion warming the air. The newcomers watched Marek with a mix of respect and caution. He greeted them with a gentle nod, his eyes conveying a warm welcome. "Welcome," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Here, hope flourishes." He guided them to the spring, offering the water, and then to the garden, explaining about the herbs. The sight of the crystalline water and the aroma of the medicinal plants dispelled their last doubts. The miracle was there, tangible. In the days that followed, the ruins transformed. Families began to settle, clearing rubble, building makeshift shelters. The sick drank from the spring and received herbal infusions, and improvement was visible each day. The children, now many, played among the stones, their laughter echoing where before there had only been silence. Marek, Lena, and Marta, with their calloused hands and hearts full of purpose, led the efforts, teaching about the herbs, organizing the work. The community was born, nourished by gratitude and the vision of a better future. Marek watched the village come to life, his heart lighter than ever. The loss of Clara, his granddaughter's illness, the loneliness. Everything seemed part of a journey that had brought him to this moment. He had not found gold, but something far more valuable, the restoration of faith, the building of an extended family, and proof that kindness, altruism, and human connection could indeed move mountains. The healing sanctuary was no longer a dream. It was a vibrant reality, a beacon of hope in a world that so desperately needed it. The healing sanctuary was no longer a dream. It was a vibrant reality, a beacon of hope in a world that so desperately needed it. As the seasons passed, the ruins metamorphosed. What was once a tangle of crumbling stones and wild vegetation was now a reborn village. Families, who initially sheltered in makeshift tents, erected small stone and wooden houses, utilizing available materials and ancestral wisdom. Marek's herb garden expanded, lovingly cultivated by all, and the spring, now protected by a simple structure, gushed uninterruptedly, its healing waters distributed with reverence. Marek, sitting on a stone bench at the door of his own restored house, watched the bustle of life. Ilara and Lyra, with rosy faces and bright eyes, played tag with Kyle and other children, their laughter echoing through the valley. There was no longer the heavy silence of illness, but rather the melody of life in full bloom. His heart, once so heavy with the pain of loss and fear, now overflowed with deep peace and immense gratitude. He touched the locket he wore, a gift from Clara, and a soft smile formed on his lips. She would have been proud. Lena, with her tireless energy, had become a natural leader. She organized the herb harvest, taught new mothers how to prepare infusions, and with Marta's help, who now held her healthy and strong baby in her arms, cared for the newcomers. With each new family that arrived, drawn by stories of healing and hope, Lena felt the validation of her own courage. Her eyes, once marked by sadness, now shone with renewed purpose. She had found not only healing for her son, but also a new home and an extended family, built on the pillars of compassion and altruism. The village was not just a place of physical healing, it was a refuge for souls. People, once isolated by fear and distrust, learned to share, to care for one another. Meals were communal, stories were exchanged around nightly fires, and work was divided, strengthening the bonds that united them. Justice there was not imposed by laws, but lived through sharing and mutual support. The triumph of each became the strength of all. Marek stood up, walking slowly to the spring. There he saw a group of children, including Ilara and Lyra, helping to clear the area, their small hands carrying stones and leaves. He knelt, feeling the fresh water in his calloused hands. It was not just water, it was the essence of life, a reminder that, even in the most desolate ruins, hope could sprout and flourish. The healing sanctuary, born of pain and hopelessness, became a living testament to human resilience and the transformative power of love. Marek, the old widower who sought to save his granddaughters, had found much more. He had planted the seeds of a new world, where kindness was the most valuable currency and human connection, the greatest treasure. And so, beneath the blue sky and twinkling stars, life continued, a hymn of hope echoing through the ancient ruins, forever a beacon in a world that so desperately needed light. Life in the ruins, now a vibrant village, followed its rhythm, a daily testament to resilience and love. The hymn of hope echoed strongly through the ancient stones. Marek, with whiter hair and beard but still bright eyes, remained the pillar of the community. His mornings began with inspecting the herb garden, his calloused hands touching each leaf. Ilara and Lyra, now older, were his shadows, learning the secrets of the spring. Lena and Marta, tireless guardians of health and well-being. Their days were filled with preparing infusions, caring for newcomers, and organizing tasks. Kyle, strong and agile, helped with construction, while Marta's son, robust and smiling, was living proof of the miracle. The community grew in number and spirit, attracting families with stories of healing and hope. However, with growth came new challenges. The distrust of the outside world. News of the village of miracles reached merchants and leaders from other regions, some curious, others skeptical, and a few fearful. One day, a small retinue of men on horseback in fine clothes and haughty gazes appeared on the horizon. They were emissaries from a distant feudal lord, demanding explanations about the magic of the ruins and the flight of his subjects. Marek received them at the village entrance, his posture erect and his gaze calm. Lena and Marta stood by his side, their hearts pounding, but their expressions firm. The emissaries, with hardened faces and authoritative voices, questioned the healing, accused Marek of sorcery, and demanded the return of the fugitives. One of them, corpulent and scarred, pointed to the children playing. "What deception is this? Healthy people do not abandon their homes for ruins." Marek, with his wisdom, invited them in, to see with their own eyes. He guided them to the spring, allowing them to taste the water. He showed them the garden, explaining the properties of the herbs. Ilara and Lyra, unafraid, offered wild berries. Lena and Marta then told their stories of pain and miraculous healing, their testimonies laden with undeniable truth. The emissaries, initially arrogant, began to hesitate. The purity of the water, the simplicity of the healing, and above all, the genuine joy and health of the people, especially the children, began to break down their barriers. The corpulent man watched Marta's son, who approached with an innocent smile, offering him a flower. His eyes, once hard, softened. Marek, sensing the change, spoke in a soft but powerful voice. "There is no magic here, sirs. Only the generosity of nature and the power of faith and community. No one is forced to stay. Those who come by choice, seeking a new chance, a place where life is valued." He extended his hand, offering a small vial with water from the spring. "Take this. Perhaps in your lands there is someone who needs a little hope." The emissaries departed, not with threats, but with the quietness of reflection. The corpulent man looked back one last time, his eyes fixed on the village where children played and the smoke from the fires rose to the sky. He nodded to Marek, a gesture of respect. The sanctuary had faced distrust and overcome it, not with force, but with truth and kindness. The seed of hope planted by Marek continued to flourish, transforming not only lives, but the perception of the world around it. Human connection, altruism, and justice lived every day with the true strength of that place, a beacon of light that expanded, touching distant hearts and showing that, even in the darkest times, faith and love could build a new dawn.